Hi everyone, Ainsley here from Small Fry Creations, and this week I'm going to show you how you can make 3 easy DIY gifts. Let me show you how we did it. As I film this, Christmas is just around the corner, so I am really excited to get into the workshop and make some handmade gifts for my loved ones this year. So as you have seen, I am going to show you today 3 really easy DIY Christmas gifts that you can make this year. The first DIY Christmas gift today is going to be a salt pig, and I think they look really cool and it's going to be a great touch for the table on Christmas Day. For this project, you're going to need a timber piece that's at least 100 mil wide. So for this, I've got a Jarrah timber panel that I have already glued together that I am going to use because I think Jarrah is a really nice piece of timber. I'm going to use a 92 mil hole saw for the outside and a 60 mil hole saw for the inside. I will also need a 64 mil hole saw, which I'll explain why later on, but they're the 3 sizes if you're going to go with the size that I'm doing that you're going to need for this project. Our very first step is to cut out a whole bunch of circles at 92 mil, so let's get to work. I've now got my circles and I need to cut out a 60 mil hole out of the center of these, and for that I'm going to use this jig on the drill press. But if you don't have the tools to make the jig or you don't want to make the jig, you can use it with simply a clamp. It's just not ideal and the jig will work better. I got the jig from Paul from the Wood Knight, and if you haven't checked him out, you certainly should, and I'll leave links in the description below for you to do that. But for the jig, it's really simple. A scrap piece of plywood, some timber that goes around that will hold in your piece of the circle or your circle, and then scrap piece of timber that will butt up on the last side, and then you need 2 wedges. So one wedge goes in here, the other wedge comes in here, and with a couple of taps of the hammer, it locks in this piece of timber, which in turn locks your circle in, and it's much safer and easier. It's a great jig for small parts. So thank you, Paul, for sharing, because this is going to get the job done. So I'm going to chuck up the drill press with my 60 mil hole saw, cut out these circles. I've sanded the inside up to 220 grit, and we are now up to the point where I can start to glue everything together. And you want to try and make sure that you've got your nicest surface at the top, because the rest of the surfaces will be hidden. So go through and choose your favorite surface for the top, and we're going to glue the rings together. We are going to use the bottom plate just to help glue and keep everything steady, but we're not actually going to glue anything to it yet. And I've also had a thought while I glue this up, make sure I put this the right way, yes I have. While I glue this up, we have circles left over from the inside of here, which are here, and I've had a thought. To go with a salt pig, I think on the table, often people also put toothpicks. You don't need as big a thing for the salt pig, so why not cut out smaller holes out of these guys, glue them up just like I'm doing now, but don't have a lid, and then you can put toothpicks in them. That way you're also cutting down your waste. So I think I'm going to do that. As soon as I finish gluing this up, I'm going to get working on the toothpicks. The cylinders are gluing up, and while that's drying, and before I get to my Bite Spark idea of toothpicks, I'm going to glue the inside to the lid, work this a little bit, and then I'm going to use the center holes to line everything up. And I'm actually going to use these center holes and plug them with 8 mil dowel, and I'm going to leave the dowel a little bit higher and sculpt that into a little bit of a handle so that you can easily pull the lid off. That way it's purposefully plugging up the hole and people won't realize that that's the reason why you did it. So I'm going to line these up, get this glued up, but first off I've just got to round this over a little bit just so it fits in nicely. been a couple of days since I glued the bottom onto the salt pig, and we're now up to the point where we can sand them. And I've already sanded the toothpick one here at 80 grit to see what it was like, and it's working out quite well. So I've got my sander here clamped down to the table because it just makes it easier when I'm sanding. And then I can go through and start to refine these and make them actually look nice and pretty and like salt pigs. Everything is sanded up to 600 grit, and just as a word of advice, most people say you have to go up to like 220, which is true, but going that extra mile to the 600, man, it makes a big difference. Now for the finish, I am going with Mind Your Beeswax Timber Polish, and this is totally food safe, which is the main reason why I'm going with it. So I've got some paper towel here, I'm going to put some wax on my cloth, and I'm going to work it into the salt pig and bring it to life. This is the reason why you do woodworking, is to bring these projects to life, because this is when you start to see all your hard work pay off, because you're not 100% sure what it's going to look like until you get to this point. The salt pigs are all done and they're looking good. So we are now on to our second easy Christmas DIY gift. And for this one, I'm going to call it a display stand for food. It could be great for a cake, cupcakes, cheeses, just about anything. And it looks great on a table because it's going to be elevated, so it gives really nice levels. And it's also great as a cake stand for those birthday parties where your showpiece want to be up off the table so that everyone can see the birthday cake. So for this, we need a board just like I've got here. Mine measures 600 mil by 300 mil. And we're going to go a little bit different and not go with a circle or a square. We're going to go with a hexagon. And for my hexagon, I'm going to cut it on the miter saw. You could totally use a jigsaw or a handsaw, but I'm going to go with my miter saw today. I need to set the miter saw to a 30-degree angle, and in order to get 2 hexagons out of this piece of board, I need to cut my sides at 148 mil. I've already cut myself a spacer block, which is the 148 that we spoke about, and I've got marks down the middle, so I can line up those middle marks like so and put marks on either side. Then what I can do is when I take it over to the miter saw, I can line up on this corner and cut my first one. Then I can use the block again, mark the line, and keep making my way around until I have myself a hexagon. All right, I've got the hexagons cut, but in order to turn this into a stand, it's going to need a base. And for mine, I'm going to go with a hexagon base. And I'm going to use a table saw to make mine, but you could also use the miter saw to make yours as well, depending on the timber that you're using. And if you can't make it, that's okay. You could always just use a really simple square base or even some dowels at the bottom to raise it up. I think that would look quite nice as well. So my timber, I need to take off the rounded edges, and then I'm going to tilt the blade on my table saw to 30 degrees, run them all through. These timber pieces are 600 mil long, so I'm going to take advantage and get the angle cut all the way down, and then I'm going to take them over to the miter saw and cut them to the length that I need, which for me, I'm going to raise mine up 100 mil up off the floor. So let's go ahead and get this timber milled up, and then we can cut them to length over at the miter saw. Right, slight change of plan. My original plan was to cut these to length now at the miter saw, but I am making 5 cake stands in total. So to do that, I've decided I'm going to do one glue up and glue all this up as one large hexagon, and then I can cut them to length once everything is dry. That also helps making sure that everything's completely square and level. So I think that's a good idea. For the gluing, I'm going to use the blue tape method. So it just means I'm going to flip my pieces up this way and run blue tape all the way down and across to give it some stability. Then I can flip it over and apply glue through the joints and wrap it around and apply a lot of blue tape to hold it in place for the next couple of hours while it dries. All right, we're at the part where we're actually going to turn these things into cake stands, and I've saved you the boring part of the video, and I have sanded these guys up to 600 grit, raising the grain in between each of the grits. I have marked on the surface that is the least favorable of the two sides, which is going to be the bottom where exactly the center is and where I need to glue my stand into place. This is going to be hard to clamp. So to clamp this, I'm just going to get myself a heavy paint tin and place it on top, and that will be just good enough to make sure that it stays in place. We now have some cake stands and they are ready for finish. And for the finish, I'm going with the Mind Your Beeswax timber polish, which is exactly the same finish that I used on the salt pigs, and it's perfect for this application because it is food grade. It's really easy to apply. All you need to do is grab some paper towel, apply a really nice thick coat, leave it overnight, and then come back the next day and buff it out. That will then call this project done. As a very last step, what I'm going to do is I've got some felt that I'm going to glue to the bottom of these to finish off the bottoms. That just protects it when it's on the table, and it also covers up the inside of your hexagon. Our cake stands are all done and they're looking awesome. So this leads me to my third and final easy Christmas DIY gift for this year. And it all starts with these little guys. These are little containers that I've picked up from Woolies. They're on special for $1, but I think you can get them from places like IKEA, Target, just have to have a hunt around for them. And these are perfect additions to the cheese platter where you can add things like oil and vinegar or olives or sweet chili and sour cream. Any of those combinations, this is what this is made for. So I'm going to put these on the timber here. Now my timber is 120 mil in width, and I'm going to cut mine to be 220 mil in length. I've also got a Forstner bit which I'm going to cut some shallow holes in for these to sink down into, and I'm also thinking I'm going to cut the corners off just to make it a little bit fancy. We're also going to introduce copper as our handle, and this is a great beginner's project. If you're wanting to get into something like copper, this is a great place to start. We're going to learn how to cut it and work with it really easily as a starting project. All right, our platforms or stands are all made for the dishes, and I did take the corners off and I did also chamfer around the edge. That just classes it up a little bit and makes it look a little bit nicer and less like a chunk of wood. We're now up to the point where I need to cut the holes for the dishes to sit in, and the purpose of this is simply so that the dish doesn't go flying off when you're carrying it around. So they only need to be shallow, and for that I'm going to use a 65 mil Forstner bit, and you can pick these up off eBay really cheap. I think I paid like $10, maybe $15 for mine. It's not the best quality, but it will 100% get the job done. I've drilled a ton of holes with this one in particular. All right, we have got our stands pretty much done and ready to be sanded and finished. But before we do that, I want to create a handle. And for that, I'm going to use copper pipe. And to be totally honest with you, up until yesterday, I was completely intimidated by copper pipe and how to use it. But it's really quite easy, or so far it has been extremely easy. You're obviously going to need some copper pipe. I'm using 1/2 inch or 12 mil copper pipe. You can pick this up from Bunnings in 1.5 meter lengths, and I think it's about $12 for 1.5 meters. You also need a way to cut the pipe, and you can, as far as I know, you can use a hacksaw, but I am going to use a pipe cutter. You can pick these up for about $15 from Bunnings. To use the pipe cutter is really easy. You just put the copper pipe in, wheel your cutter up so that it's just touching the copper pipe, rotate around once, give the tightening around a 1/4 turn or a 1/2 turn, and rotate around again, and continue that process until you have cut through the pipe. And it gives a really nice clean cut, to be honest, so it's actually really easy to use, no need to be intimidated. Now to put it into the timber, I'm going to pre-drill 10 mil down, and I've got a 12.5 mil drill bit here that I'm going to drill through, and I want my copper pipe to stand about 100 mil out of the timber. And to finish the copper pipe off, I'm just going to have an end cap that sits straight on top. Now from my research, you can use Gorilla Glue to glue everything in, so that's what I'm going to try. We're going to learn together as we go along, but that's what I've been told. So I need to pre-drill these holes and then cut my copper pipe to length, and then we can glue it all together. Our stands are sanded up to 600 grit and they are ready for finish, but before we do that we have to deal with the copper. Now you've just seen me cut it to length and it's ready to go, but I want to get rid of the red writing that is on the copper pipe, and to do that I'm going to use a 600 grit sandpaper to sand it off, and then I'm going to use some really fine steel wool to buff it out to a really nice finish. And you can pick up this steel wool from the sanding section of your hardware store, or at least that's where I found mine. I've also got my end caps, so these can be Gorilla Glued onto the top. And to finish the copper and stop it from patining, I'm going to use some clear satin spray paint. There you have it, the gifts are all finished. And not only do they make great gifts, but the perfect addition to any celebration. I hope you've liked this video, and if you have, help me out by hitting those subscribe and like buttons, and I'll see you on the next one.